Obviously, this is a hot issue right now when we talk about health insurance and healthcare costs. Both our presidential candidates have very different views on this. Obviously, Biden was part of the Affordable Care Act when he was vice president. Trump wants to do away with it. The Supreme Court will be taking this up the week after the election. So I'm just going to say before I even start here, the goal of this is not in any way political. I have no view one way or the other professionally on the current policy. The goal of this project was just to say, what are our Kansas farm families paying for health insurance, and how has that changed over the last 10 years? So that is what I'm going to be looking at in the next 30 minutes here. So just to start out a little bit with an icebreaker kind of thing, if you have a client come in your office and you would ask them, how much are you paying for health insurance for your family? What would they tell you? Too bleep much is probably the answer that you would get. We'll censor that for the online audience. And looking at the data, I can see why that perception is out there, and we'll take a look at that here. So over the last few weeks, Kevin Herbal, who's in the back here, director of the Kansas Farm Management Association, and myself have looked at our farm families in the Kansas Farm Management Association database. So these are families that work with our economists to do their taxes every year, and that's how we're able to get detailed numbers on what their health care insurance costs are, what their medical costs are, what their net farm income profitability would be. And in some cases, we have detailed family living analysis on these farms as well. So we're going to dive into this. You should have a handout in your packet. The funny story on this, it looks like a publication, but it is actually not a publication yet. This will be up on Ag Manager hopefully in the next few weeks. As we started this project, my kids and I have been quarantined for the last 2 weeks. We were let out of jail this morning. So I've been working with a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and in those 2 weeks, my computer also crashed for 2 days. So I hope to have that publication ready. But you'll see it's written by myself, Alan Featherstone, Kevin Herbal, but there's actually no writing in it. So the figures and tables are done, but we'll be putting this publication out there hopefully in the next few weeks so you can share it with your clientele as well. You're getting an early preview with today's presentation. So to start out with 2019, I'm just looking at this year specifically. That's the last year we have, obviously. And what I did is characterize those into the different categories: singles that are under 65, over 65. If it's a couple, are they under 65 or over 65? And then families, because obviously these have different cost structures when we're looking at health insurance. You can see the counts of how many we have in each category. Again, it's about 168 farms that we're looking at through this data set. And the first number here is the average of what they're paying for health insurance. And these first two categories are fairly small. We don't have a lot of people in these categories. But for singles under 65, it's about $11,000 last year that they paid in health insurance costs. And we do not know what plans they're on. I'll throw that out there too. We're going to start collecting that this year as the economists work through our farm families to do their taxes. So we will have some more information on what kind of plans our farms are on. But what I want to point out in all these categories is just a variation, the min and the max, of how much these families are paying. So even for these singles, $4,500 up to $7,500 in the difference in plans that they're on. The second block here is just the yearly medical care expenses that they have. And again, that's in our singles here adds another $3,000, but a range anywhere from $40,000 up to $5,700. The last column here, I put the average age of our principal operator on these farms, because one thing you'll notice looking at these data, our couples under 65 years of age are spending about $5,400 or $15,400 on health insurance. Our families are actually showing a little less than that, about $14,000 on a yearly basis, but they're about 10 years difference in age. So our clients that are in the KFMA database, typically if they're a couple without children, they are kind of in that stage. They didn't hit Medicare age yet, but their kids have moved out of the house. So that's just a little bit of a phenomenon going on there, why that range and that number would be a little higher for our couples versus our families. And you'll see that as I go throughout the different things I talk about today. So it's a little easier to see graphically. This is the same exact information, but the middle blue thing here is the average, and then the orange bar is the range. So you can see just a huge amount of range, especially in our couples and our families, on how much they're paying for health insurance. And there's a lot of factors that go into that. Is it a high deductible plan? Is it a real comprehensive plan? What kind of health issues have they had? But overall, what we found here, about $10,000 on average for singles under 65, $4,500 for singles over 65 that are likely on Medicare, $15,000 in our couples under 65, dropping down here a little bit to $10,000 just about on our couples over 65, and then $14,000 on our families. Now, those are 2019 values. Go ahead.
So a family or a couple that has insurance available off the farm, would they be completely excluded, or if they're doing a partial payment, would they still be included, and it might skew that number?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the question was, if they have off-farm employment on the farm, you know, that's a big factor in getting their health insurance. How does that factor into these numbers? We tried to weed that out. So there were some farms that definitely had off-farm employment that was not being captured on their tax returns as far as their health insurance costs. So this, as clean as we could get it, is the actual health insurance costs of that farm family. There may be a little bit of that influence that we could not determine in the data, but overall this should be fairly accurate for the entire health insurance cost. So the next thing we want to look at is what happened in the last 10 years. Now, to just give you some context, so the Affordable Care Act came in March of 2010. Over the next few years, different pieces out of the Affordable Care Act started coming into place. And then 2019 was the first tax year that the mandate of carrying health insurance was removed, or that tax consequence of carrying health insurance was removed. So over this 10-year time period, that's what kind of was in place underlying these health insurance policies. Now this is for singles under 65. I only have 6 that were in this category. And the reason these numbers are different from 2019 that I showed you is we had to have families stay in the same category for that whole 10 years. So I have some singles that were married in this 10-year time period. I have families that their children moved out, so now they're couples. I had couples that turned 65 in this 10 years, so they're on Medicare somewhere in there. So it's a little messy as we're looking through these 10 years, but I'm going to show you every kind of category that I sorted these families into to look at their health insurance costs. So our first one here is singles under 65, and you can see a fairly good trend of how those health insurance costs have increased over the 10-year time frame. Bottom line, it was about $5,000 that their policies increased in 10 years, and that is an 83.4% increase in those health insurance costs. We actually did this same study 2 years ago, and it was just about doubling. So now we're down, which is still not good, to an 83% increase. We're getting a little bit of a leveling off, but it's still a very large increase over these 10 years. And I have the next column over is the medical care cost, and you can see here that rose about $862 for these individuals, or 40.3%. Most of you know what net farm income has been doing. Michael talked about that too. But here's the net farm income for these individuals. Obviously pretty high when we had good profitability, and has now dropped back down. So as health insurance has been increasing, medical costs increasing some, net farm income's coming down. This is why we're getting all that pressure, obviously, for these farms. Most of these I'm going to show graphically, not show you the table and the graph, but this way it's a good visual to kind of see the dynamics coming into place here without looking at the actual numbers. All these graphs are the same. The green bars are net farm income. That's on the axis on your right here. The other one on the left shows the values of the health insurance and the medical care costs. So again, in these singles, you can see it was relatively stable, and then in 2015, started at a pretty high growth rate as far as what our insurance costs. These medical care costs, as the blue line, besides the big event that an individual had in 2013, have been a little more stable. Ooh, it's getting dark.
Use number 3.
Thank you. Okay. So, as we go on to couples, so these are couples under 65 years of age. This is a bigger category. We have 24 in here. Again, that had data for all 10 years. That was consistent. Average age here is 61. So again, most of these couples represent those that their kids have moved out, but they're not yet eligible for Medicare. So bottom line here, the increase has been about 79%. They started out about $8,362, and now we're up around $15,000 as far as their average insurance costs. Medical care costs have increased some, a little over $1,000, which represents a 30.5% increase. Graphically, you can see here that orange line is the health insurance cost. We see a pretty steady increase throughout these 10 years as we see the green bars going down in net farm income, medical care costs being the blue line, fairly stable. If you're following along in your packet, I did label which one I'm talking about. It's around figure 4 right now. So I'm going to start skipping the tables and just look at the graphs, just so I don't put you all to sleep before lunch here. So this is an interesting category, couples that turn 65. And it's really kind of hard to look at because in our database, we only know the age of the principal operator. So the year that he or she turns 65, when I look at the raw data, it's quite interesting that sometimes I can identify exactly when they went on Medicare. There's a definite drop in the data. Other ones I can't tell. There's really no savings when they went on Medicare. And there's 2 reasons likely I'm seeing this. One, they might have a spouse that's significantly older or younger than themselves. And so when they go on Medicare versus the operator, kind of skews the data a little bit. And the second one, just depending on what supplemental plans that they purchase when they go on Medicare, they may or may not have a ton of savings over what they're currently paying. So it makes it a little difficult to really look at trends and how that affects this trend. So in this data, in 2010, all of these individuals, 41, or all these couples, 41, were not on Medicare. They weren't 65 yet. By 2019, they were all over 66. So in this point in time, likely they did get on Medicare. The drop here is about $500 or 5.2%. So there was a savings, but it's fairly small. But the thing you did see is it's not increasing like the other categories. So there is a savings ongoing on Medicare, but not a ton is what I've seen in the data here. I do want to look at later on, like lining that year up when they did go on Medicare to just evaluate that drop. But initially, this is what we're seeing. So then for couples over 65, so this average age here is in 2019, they're 72. So they were easily Medicare age by the time we started in 2010. So their increase is a little flatter than the other categories that we've seen, but it's still going up. So over these 10 years, even though they're on Medicare, they're paying more for health insurance, supplemental plans, and that kind of thing. Their medical care costs are relatively flat though. And again, net farm income, the reason you can't even see it, most of these graphs in 2015 or 2016 even, is because it's negative. Families becoming couples, another interesting dynamic. If you get to the age that your kids are going out of the house and you think, well, I'm going to save some good money here, not having them on my plan anymore, this graph might be a little depressing to you, because most of the time when I look at these data, when those kids are going off the policy, it's not really having that much of an effect. And part of that is the couple is getting older each year as well, so their health insurance costs are naturally going to be going up. But here, or again, orange line, these couples started over here, reading that. and then increase about 15,000. So starting here at about 11,000. So it's increasing, but not as much as some of our other categories as well. And same as our other ones, medical care costs are bouncing around, but relatively flat. My final group here would be families, and 47 observations are in here. So they started as families in 2010, and they remained as families through 2019. I think this is the biggest eye-opener here, is just the uniformity and the steepness of their health insurance costs throughout these 10 years. So they started around $8,000 and are ending up around $15,000. And I don't have that paper in front of me, but I think that's 78% increase, if I remember right, in those health insurance costs. At the same time, medical care costs relatively flat, net farm income going down, but then as we talked about, the MFP payments in the last 2 years have really stabilized those farm families' income. Now, the next step I wanted to look at is, we know a lot of costs of living are increasing. So what percentage of everything they're spending on family living would be health insurance costs? So on these 168 farm families, 14 couples under 65, 15 couples over 65, and 23 families provided us detailed family itemized living costs over these 10 years. So I could study each year, how did health insurance relate to the rest of their family living costs. So that's what I was studying in this next section. And I know it's hard to read on your screen. I tried to make it real big in your printed handout so you can make sure to actually look at these numbers yourself. But basically, the first line in this table would be their health insurance costs. For couples under 65, we're looking at this first. This varies a little bit from the last I presented because it's a little smaller subset. So the average in this group is actually a little bit higher than the bigger numbers I had that didn't all have family living costs. But basically, they started in 2010 down here about 9,000. They're actually about to 17,000 by 2019 as far as health insurance costs. How does that relate to their total family living? In 2010, it was about 55,000. Here in 2019, that's upwards of 70,000. So the next column or next row there is just the ratio of those two things. How much of that is health insurance? And on the graphical form, that's that blue line right here. So they started out about 16 or 17% of everything they spent on family living was health insurance. And this is not including the medical care costs. This is just health insurance. And by the end of 2019, so 10 years later, about 25% of everything they're spending on family living is health insurance. So that, is quite a bit of an increase. One thing influencing that, so we had higher family living in these 3 years, 12, 13, and 14. What was driving that is we had a lot of profitability, obviously, a lot of net farm income. A lot of farm families increased their spending. I did observe a couple individuals that probably built new houses in those years because they had a ton of family living expense. But as farm profitability has came down, being able to rein in or pull in that family living expense has been difficult, especially in the area of health insurance. There's not a lot of wiggle room there. So that is what's contributing to that ratio going up as well. Now for couples over 65, it's a little flatter trend. Again, the top numbers, the health insurance cost for this subset. Total family living start at 58,000, upwards of 67,000. And so that ratio in the 2 years that there was a lot of family living spending was actually down to about 10%, creeping back up here now about 15%. So 15% of what a couple over 65 spends every year in family living is health insurance costs. Now finally, families, they just spend more on family living. Obviously they have kids to take care of. They are going to be spending more anyway, so their ratio is a little lower. So here there's in 2010 it's about 64,000 in total family living. In 2019, it's about 83,000. And one thing I forgot to mention, this is family living excluding income taxes. So if you look at our KFMA numbers, family living looks a little higher there. We took out income taxes because that is really driven by farm profitability, and we didn't want to skew our family living numbers because that actually comes in a year after that profitability or lack thereof event. So family living minus income taxes would be what I'm actually using here. So these families started out about 12–13% that they spent in their total spending on health insurance. That has increased to about 17% over this 10-year time frame. And on the graph, and again, we saw a run up in this family living expenses and then a bit of a struggle in the last 4 years to try to bring that back down. So I got a little bit of time here. I'll go through my conclusions and then we can talk about this a little bit. But basically, no-brainer health insurance is increasing over the 10 years for all of the farm types that we have in our database, except for the ones that are turning 65 in this time frame. They're the only category that we saw just a little bit of pullback in what they're paying for health insurance costs. Medical care costs are mostly flat. Some of them have increased a little bit, but there's a lot of variability year to year depending on medical events that might occur. Bottom line, the average farm couple that's less than 65 years of age is spending on average, again, there's a huge variability in this, but on average, $15,000 to $17,000 a year on health insurance. That's a 79% increase over the last 10 years in what they're paying, and that represents about 25% of their total family living each year. The farm family, a little bit less than that. Again, it's because our couples tend to be right before that medical or Medicare age. Our families are a little bit younger, even though there's more people in the policy. $14,000 to $15,000 a year on health insurance is our average. Again, big variability around that average. That's an 83% increase in the last 10 years, and that represents now about 17% of their total family living expense. So that is all I have prepared for today. We are going to be looking at this ongoing and seeing what more we can do with it. Again, the publication in front of you that just has the tables and figures, we will actually be writing up and publishing hopefully in the coming weeks here. So, questions or comments?
Go ahead.
Everybody's getting hungry.
Apparently. I don't have anything on here yet. Let me.
Go ahead.
I'm a little confused that the cost of actual health care stayed really steady, but the cost of the insurance has gone up. Does that mean that the marketplace is properly pricing health insurance, or that people are getting different deductibles, or are those tied together at all?
So the question is, why are health insurance premiums increasing so much, but the medical care costs fairly stable? I don't have a ton of explanation for that, that I can observe in the data. I would say it's just, as my personal experience, as the insurance policies are covering a little better for a lot of these farm families that maybe they don't have as much of a share. I know preventative care is one thing that we're not paying for near as much that we used to. So a lot of the preventative care is actually a small copay or free. And so I think that's contributing to it. But yeah, it's a very consistent trend in the data that health insurance is going up and health care or the medical care cost is stable. There's obviously a lot of uncertainty in the future where this is going to be going. I think as we're asking next year what policies the farm families are on, it'll be interesting to see. I know there's been the Farm Bureau one that's released, and a lot of our farm families are on that or taking a look at that. The Christian Health Share Ministry policies, or not even policies, but have become a little more popular, being used now. And so I'm gonna certainly be looking ongoing at this research and see what we can find out next year when we know what policies these families are on.
Last call. All right, well, thanks, Robin. Give her a hand here.
I was going to mention one more thing, Rick. So I wear a lot of hats in the department. Some of you probably heard of last year or last winter, Lovette Windsor and I did a series across Kansas on, it was marketed as a program for Kansas farm women, a farm financial series. We did balance sheet, income statement, cash flow, and record keeping. We're actually turning that onto an online class this year, and you will, or anybody going through it would get FSA, borrowers turning financial credit. So if you have customers that need that or just would benefit from a course, it's not an actual K-State numbered class or anything. It's just for extension for individuals that need a primer in those financial statements and record keeping. We're going to be launching that likely in December. So I'm sure you'll see it from Ag Manager, but we had 685 individuals go through that class last winter. And even before COVID, we talked about putting that class online so anybody could take it on demand whenever they needed it at their own pace. So look for that. We'll be marketing it likely December or January. If any of your clients need the FSA borrowers training credit or just could use some more help and information on putting together those statements and what they mean as far as making management decisions on their operation. So.
Yeah, and based on the comments they had from that, it seemed pretty helpful for folks to understand how to use those things.
Yeah, we're going to try to go back to doing it in person, not this winter, but the following winter. But it was a program we live streamed from campus, but we had 32 locations across Kansas where not just women, but men came too, and we're at the physical site together with an extension agent leading that site. And it was probably one of the highlights of my career, and I've been here 10 years, so very successful program as far as the timeliness and the impact of these producers that are struggling right now.